This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
And that's me. Welcome to this Wednesday edition. It is Hump Day, Kentucky's Voice edition. We are here today with you from 11 to noon, as we are each weekday. And we are unapologetic about the fact that this show reports and analyzes the news from a conservative, common sense, and Christian point of view. Well, the topic of discussion around Kentucky's political water cooler this week has been Senator Robin Webb's announcement that she is leaving the Democratic Party and joining the already supersized supermajority GOP in the Kentucky Senate. Senator Webb, who, by the way, is from Grayson, Kentucky, not Grayson County. I think that was said yesterday. It should be Grayson, Kentucky. Here she is on Fox News talking about why she made her decision to change and her concern about where the Democratic Party is heading. Clip one.
Men are leaving the Democrat Party. Gen Z is leaving that party as well. And now Democrats are leaving the Democratic Party.
Who's staying? Well, we know who. The last Democratic state senator in rural Kentucky has officially switched sides, claiming the party left her. Kentucky State Senator Robin Webb, no relation, great name, explains this after the break. Joining us, that former Kentucky State Democrat senator, now Republican, no relation, but I do love the last name, State Senator Robin Webb. Great to have you here. Kentucky is a little bit controversial or contradicted. You get the governor, Democrat. You changed. What drove you over the top? Was it Swalwell and Crockett?
Well, yes, Kentucky's an anomaly, and I guess I've been an anomaly too, because I've always had a conservative record. But I think it was a culmination of issues for the last few years, and the disenfranchised rural voter and rural values and rural economy that I felt more than anything, whether it's the energy sector, the ag sector, Second Amendment, the list goes on.
And that's because the party has become really progressive. That's what we've seen over time. There's no more moderate Democrat Party. There's no more Bill Clinton in his second term with respect to how he was governing. Everyone is very, very progressive. So if you have sort of a center or a little bit left of center perspective, it's almost like you don't fit in anymore.
And yeah, I felt that way. And the urban-rural divide is demographics and the zealous advocacy for your district. I respect that. I'm going to continue to work.
Bourbon, by the way, one of your big exports, is a $9 billion industry and then spreads out to the world from that. If that's the success track for Kentucky, then it sounds like Democrats would want to take that money and put it into their causes.
Well, and as far as agriculture, we have chicken and horses, and I'm an equestrian myself, a little biased. I'm a cattle producer. Our presence east of the Mississippi is quite substantial in that regard. And all those issues are very real. So in rural Kentucky, line. And that improves quality of life for everybody. If we've got a vital ag sector, whether it's a processing plant that we lose, have lost because of policies and inaction and inability to work together, that's one example. And there are several more. And yes, our economy's good, but the legislative branch should enable the economy, and I think we've done that in Kentucky in the General Assembly.
Real quick before we let you go, I'm just wondering if you think somebody like Jasmine Crockett or AOC is the future of the party.
that's up to the leaders that are left. I think if you look at the national trend, that might not be the best course of action to secure the rural vote for them.
We got to go, Robin Webb. Thank you.
That's Senator Webb on Fox News is the bottom line. And I think one of the important things that she highlighted and has been talked about during the Trump campaign a lot, both of his campaigns, is the urban-rural divide, not only in Kentucky, but nationally. And Senator Webb has always had a conservative record. She talked about the processing plant that we've lost because of an inability to work together. She talked about disenfranchised rural voters. She talked about energy. She talked about agriculture. She talked about the Second Amendment. And Senator Webb has always been one of my favorite legislators in Frankfort because she's focused much more on the policy than she is the politics. She's not tried to please political masters. She's always said, and perhaps every time she gets up to speak on the floor, or most of the time, that I'm here to represent the will of my constituents who voted me here and to serve the people who sent me here, serve the citizens in my district, which is out in eastern Kentucky. And I think there were couple other important points there, that there's no more a moderate Democratic Party. It doesn't exist anymore. And I think it did in Kentucky until recently. I think it existed here longer than perhaps many of the other states, because we have had a very conservative populace here in general. But generally speaking, across the board, I mean, if you hear Representative Morgan McGarvey talk, he's singing the tune of the radical left of his party. If you hear other Democrats here, our governor, Andy Beshear, is trying to build his political resume largely by making sure that the left wing of his party understands that he's on board with all of their radical policies and ideas, even though his actual governing here at times has been pretty moderate and even good in some cases, and we've been willing to say that. But the point is, nationally, there's no more Bill Clinton party. There's no more, you won't hear a Democrat get up and say that the era of big government is over like Bill Clinton did. And I think it was really important. Senator Webb's interview was important, not just to explain why she switched her party affiliation, but to talk about the serious issues involved with the party, which comprises tens of millions of Americans. So it's a very important discussion. But like she said, there's really no room for left of center people in her party that may be conservative on some issues and not so conservative on others in a traditional sense. But she talked about herself being a budget nerd. I think that we're going to look here. I really hope that the Republicans in the state Senate, the leadership, will find a way to engage her, possibly as a leader in that caucus. I think that she has a tremendous amount of experience. She's from rural Kentucky, and we need those voices there. And we have some other great rural Republicans that are also involved in the leadership. But I think she brings a perspective to the Senate that's needed. And now that she's in the majority party, I think she'll be able to have more influence, and I hope they'll find a way, and I expect them to find a way, Senate President Stivers, the other leaders in the Senate, to engage her in that way. She talked about being a budget nerd. As I said, she said that the budget decisions are about the quality of life for everyone. That's really true. You know, the budgets don't get a lot of attention, but they indicate what's a priority, what's important to the state and to the legislators. That's their number one constitutional duty as a state legislator, is to pass a balanced budget. It's not to, you know, it's not about bathroom policy in schools. All those things are important, but it's about getting a balanced budget that serves the needs of the states, that makes a decision about how taxpayer dollars, resources provided by the taxpayers, will be spent and will be expended. And voters need to hold legislators accountable for that job primarily. And how are they spending our dollars? Are they spending more than we take in? We've seen that in the past. Now, the current legislature, I think, has done a much better job, and Senator Webb talked about that. And she talked about the fact that the job really of the legislature is to establish policy that allow individuals and that allows businesses to flourish and basically gets out of the way of the people and lets them make their own decisions. And there was a lot of mocking by national Democrats on the coast, California, New York, the East and West Coast Democrats, especially back, you'll remember when Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump in the first race, in his first campaign for president, about the rural voters and really putting them down and talking about how they just cared about their gods and their guns and just a whole lot of nonsense like that, really kind of dismissing the rural voter and the rural, a rural Kentuckian would be a good picture of who they belittled in that race. And we saw how that turned out for him because I think the rural voters care much more about the policy being enacted. And when they see some of these radical left-wing policies that are coming out of the Democratic Party, they're saying, hey, I may have been a Democrat for a long time, and my family probably was, and generations were, but that's no longer who I am. And it reminds me of a great president in my lifetime, the great Ronald Reagan, who also grew up as a Democrat but later became a Republican. We'll talk more about that, and we're actually seeing some outside the party independent thinking by several in Kentucky's federal delegation. That and more coming up on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for joining us. Don't go away.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And we're also on TV now, by the way. You can catch this program if you're listening to it today on the radio live. You can catch a replay of it on television, WBNA Channel 21 at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern Time. So we hope you'll make both part of your day. Certainly the live program here. We can take your texts, by the way, and get those on the air today. Kentucky's Voice text line is 502-571-0970, 502-571-0970. And would love to hear from you and appreciate the increased engagement that we've seen over the last few programs, especially since we started combining this radio and TV. And this is Kentucky's Voice. We are conservative, common sense, and Christian-based. And we're the only outlet that makes that claim in our state. So glad to have you with us. If you're looking for a conservative coverage and analysis of the news and opinion of the news, you've found it right here at Kentucky's Voice. So Senator Webb, one of my favorite legislators in Frankfort, has switched her party affiliation from Democrat to Republican. And by the way, she's following what a lot of Kentuckians have done, because just in the last couple of years, for the first time in the history of the state, there are now more registered Republicans than there are Democrats, as those numbers have continued to increase. And it was only a matter of time before we saw some rural legislators, I think, make that decision. And we're seeing it with Senator Robin Webb. And the reasoning she gave in that Fox News interview you heard earlier reminds me of the late, great Ronald Reagan, whose family grew up during the Great Depression. His father, other family members of his and his extended family, he talked about how they got jobs as part of the Great Society programs that were created by FDR's administration to give people employment during the Great Depression, when the market crashed, when our economy tanked. And by the way, one of the major reasons that happened that you won't hear in most of the public school textbooks is because of the decisions made in the past, before all of that caught up with us in terms of government spending, overspending, debt, deficit, and we paid a big price for it with the Great Depression, as well as some other decisions that were made that all worked together. It was a perfect storm, if you will. But to try to help the nation recover from that, FDR's plan was to create jobs paid for essentially by the federal government that would build our infrastructure, build roads, build bridges, build utilities, and so forth. And Ronald Reagan's family during that time, his father, I think some of his father's brothers maybe, or family, were beneficiaries of those programs, got jobs because of it. Now, they had all been Democrats, but later on, Reagan said he broke away when he began to see how government programs and dictates destroyed individual initiative and liberty and created an environment of dependency. In fact, he would not agree if we said that he left the Democratic Party. Rather, he said, my principles, my values, my beliefs all remain the same. It's the party that left me. Clip 2, go.
This broadcast in 1966 when he was running to be governor of California as a candidate who'd switched parties. Here's how he described himself.
Since I've been a Republican, and I was a Democrat most of my life, I believe that you play on the team, and I have participated to the best of my ability, and I did nothing in the '64 campaign that I didn't do in those other campaigns.
Have your views changed substantially in any regard since the 1964 campaign?
No, as a matter of fact, my views haven't changed an awful lot since I was a Democrat. I believed then that anything, whether it came from labor, management, or government, that imposed unfairly.
And that was, that was Ronald Reagan back in an interview on Meet the Press in 1966 when he was running for governor of California. He had switched parties, but he had not compromised his principles. And so, folks, I believe that America is largely a center-right country. Most people in America could care less about your political affiliation or even the political affiliations of those who go to Washington and Frankfort. Now, the people in those bubbles, they think everybody cares about that. They lose that's one of the reasons why we have problems with people who spend too much time in government, because they lose their perspective. They lose touch with the common person and with their priorities and what they really care about. and how, what people really care about, I think most citizens, is what are the policies and how does it affect our daily lives? How does it affect how we live and how we can raise our children and what kind of education we can give them and what opportunities we have to better ourselves. And I believe that the election and the re-election of Donald Trump, agree with him or not, like him or not, I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about what his election, re-election say and what the statement is and what it means. And I believe it's a strong confirmation that there are lots of Americans out there who want something done about the size, scope, and cost of government. Now, whether that happens or not, that's up to the Trump administration and up to Trump himself. But I do think that one of the primary reasons that Trump won and that he has the support he needs to push forward his agenda is a lot has to do with it. A lot of it has to do, I should say, with rural voters and with men. A lot of men, a lot of rural voters, they look at both parties with contempt, and they don't see a whole lot of difference. But they look at a disruptor like Donald Trump, who's hated by the establishment of the Democrats. He's hated by the establishment, perhaps even more hated by the establishment of the Republicans. And they look at him and they say, he must be doing something right because he's got the folks I don't like disliking him. So the enemy of your enemy is my friend, right? Or something like that. Plus, and I'll say it because, men, especially those with younger families, young men are tired of what I would call the feminization of America, okay? And a lot of women are tired of this nonsense as well. Now, you might not agree, but that's okay. I'm sitting here at the mic. It's my opinion. This is my opinion. This isn't anybody else's opinion. I'm not speaking for anybody. Kentucky's Voice has given me this time because they understand that I'm a true conservative, that I believe in the principles that made America great: less government, more freedom, more liberty, and basically get out of our way and let us pursue our own happiness and life as we feel called to live it. But I want to say this on the partisan issue. I'm not a partisan guy. And, I don't believe most Americans are. Trump is not partisan. In August 2001, Trump changed his party affiliation to Democrat. That's right. September 2009, he changed it back to Republican. In December 2011, he changed it to independent, no party affiliation at all. And in April 2012, he again returned to the Republican Party. I believe that Kentuckians especially want less emphasis on party and politics and more on productive policy, which is why they've elected people to Washington, increasingly are electing people to go to Washington and to go to Frankfurt, that while they are Republicans, they will be willing to challenge big spending, big government policies that come from their own party leaders, and they're willing to stand up and not be suppressed by the establishment who may have gained and entrenched positions of power in their party. And I believe that's very important. If you're a legislator and you're in Frankfurt, you may have just been elected, but you weren't elected by the leadership up there. You were elected by the citizens and the constituents in your district to go represent them, and sometimes that means standing up even to your own party. And we have increasingly seen independent-minded, more populist thinking conservatives, true conservatives, in Washington and in Frankfurt. Now, the Washington Post is labeling some of Kentucky's federal congressional delegation as the Bluegrass Resistance. We'll tell you more about what that's all about coming up in the next segment right here on Kentucky's Voice, 502-571-0970. Let's hear from you today. We'll get your text on the air. Don't go away. More to
Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Jim Waters in with you. This is Hump Day, the Hump Day version of Kentucky's Voice Radio. Glad to have you with us. You're listening to this live on the radio, but you can join us this afternoon at 4 o'clock on TV for a replay of this program. Same program, but you can just see us. And if there's an interview that you liked or want to hear again, that's a great way to do it. Just tune right in this afternoon or set your DVR, as we might say. We're talking today about partisanship. The Washington Post is labeling some of Kentucky's federal congressional delegation as the bluegrass resistance due to their willingness to stand up to ideas coming out of the Trump administration, particularly as it relates to economic policy. Check out this recent report on Wave 3.
Won Kentucky in the last election with 65% of the vote.
So why are three of the state's most high-profile Republican congressional figures pushing back on some Trump policies? Wave News reporter David Mattingly has more now on what one national columnist calls the bluegrass resistance.
That's right. Senators Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, and Representative Thomas Massie are conservatives from a conservative state, and they are by no means switching sides in this fiercely divided Congress. But they are getting noticed for their opposition to parts of the Trump agenda. In the House, Thomas Massie votes against Trump's big, beautiful bill.
We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
In the Senate, Rand Paul objects to raising the debt limit.
I want nothing to do with that. I didn't vote for the spending. I didn't vote for the debt.
And Senator Mitch McConnell, long on the record, against raising tariffs.
I'm not a fan of tariffs. I hope it works.
Together, they are turning heads in Washington as three conservative Republicans pushing back against the Trump agenda. A Washington Post correspondent calls them the bluegrass resistance, writing, while the overwhelming majority of Republicans cower in fear of primary challenger threats against anyone who opposes him, these Kentuckians brush aside the Trump bluster. And it hasn't been without fallout from the White House. President Trump warning McConnell he was playing into the hands of the radical left, and Rand Paul that the great people of Kentucky will never forgive him. Trump's strongest words were saved for Massie when the president was quoted saying, "I think he should be voted out of office." How voters respond remains to be seen.
In the short term, resisting Donald Trump could be risky for members of the Republican Party. You know, if you go back a few decades ago, it was common for members of a party to be independent and to break away from their party leadership. That ability to be independent has gone away.
I wanted to know what Massie, McConnell, and Paul think about the label bluegrass resistance. I contacted all of their offices for comments. So far, no replies. David Mattingly, Wave News.
Now, I disagree with that Stephen Voss who was quoted in there. And, you know, the ability to disagree has not gone away. It just takes some people with a spine. And Thomas Massie has a spine. Rand Paul has a spine. Mitch McConnell, even occasionally at least, has a spine. And at the end of the day, they understand what we were talking about in the last segment. That they're not in Washington to please their party masters. Although the party masters are okay with it if you believe that that's the case. Because they have in many cases, and there's good people in the party, but we've got some good people in the local Jefferson County GOP party. So this is not a blanket statement, but it is about the environment of party politics. I think people who run the parties have an overinflated sense of their importance. Because as the reporter said, it's up to voters to decide. And even Donald Trump can make his opinion known, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to carry a lot of weight. I mean, Thomas Massie has been reelected by lopsided margins, and they've gotten even larger in some cases. Nobody's been able to beat him. Nobody's been able to come close to him in a primary. In a general election, Rand Paul has had very good success. Mitch McConnell, of course, has been reelected many times, and that might be a little story there. But still, the point is that we understand, and that it's up to the voters at the end of the day. And the voters seem to be saying, we like this. We like healthy debate. We like it when people stand up for what they believe in Washington, and even though we like Donald Trump here, we voted him. We had one of the highest percentages of votes for Donald Trump in any state in the country, but we also send Rand Paul there, who we know doesn't always agree with Trump, and Trump doesn't always agree with him, and we send Thomas Massie there, and Thomas Massie doesn't always agree. This is healthy, folks. This is the way it should be. This is the way it was when we got the Constitution for our country. They had big fights over what the Constitution should say and what the Bill of Rights should say and how it should say it. And Thomas Jefferson, if you think Jefferson and Adams agreed all the time, you're wrong. They disagreed a lot. And they had big fights, verbal fights, and sometimes even physical duels, as we know, which, thank goodness, we don't have those anymore. At least we haven't had yet. But that doesn't mean that they weren't all on the same team either. It's like being in a family. You know, you have disagreements in the family, but if somebody comes against a family member of yours, you got their back. So I think that's the way it's kind of been with Trump. And I think that it's important to understand that you can disagree on certain issues and agree on other issues. And as Senator Rand Paul has said many times, he endorsed Trump, he supported him, but that doesn't mean he agrees with him. And if he doesn't, he should speak up, because he's sent there at the end of the day, not by Donald Trump, but by his constituents. That's how it works. Now, I think Donald Trump is going to have an enduring legacy in some key and important areas. I think he has ensured a generation of conservative Supreme Court decisions, which have been extremely important to protecting our Constitution, protecting our representative republic. He has secured America's borders. We are a sovereign nation. If you don't have borders, you might as well not claim to be a sovereign nation or a nation at all. After all, we don't find other countries building walls to keep people out. They're building them to keep people in. And he's greatly reduced, if not eliminated, much of the partisan influence in our politics, and instead turned the focus to the policy and, perhaps most importantly, the results of party in our lawmaking. So it's more with him about the results. He's really remade the Republican Party by doing that. Now, you might not agree, and I don't necessarily agree with all of his policy. I think the tariffs are very short-sighted, if they do any good at all. They're very short-sighted. It's a sorry excuse for the lack of a real economic development program to rely on tariffs. But we'll see if this spurs some codifying, some policy making, some reforms that we've needed. Then we might look at the chaos and say there was an upside to it, even though we don't agree. But that's at least the discussion. He's gotten the discussion to what are the results? What are the results? Not about who got the party leadership titles or who got those positions, but what about the results? But see, this is bringing to the surface the dangers that George Washington warned us about partisan politics. In his farewell address of 1796, George Washington expressed deep concern about the dangers of political partisanship, warning that excessive party loyalty could undermine the unity and stability of the United States. He cautioned against what he called the baneful effects of the spirit of party, noting that partisanship divides the nation. It would foster animosity. It would create factions that prioritize the interests of the party over the common good. Have we not seen that? We have seen that. And so a guy like Trump comes along who's not really a party guy. He's a populist. And he's all about the policy and the results, the products, if you will, that are created by the policies. And so he seems abnormal. But really, that's what Washington and the founders envisioned, independent thinkers who would come to Washington for a period of time, not for a career, but for a limited amount of time, whether Washington or Frankfurt or wherever, and they would fight this out. They would and out of those fights and out of those debates and out of those disagreements would come the best policy for the most people, and then they would go home and live under the policies that they created. So Washington was worried about the partisanship and sort of the entrenched partisanship, if you will, too, and what that would create and the results that would be, that would have on our country. He worried it could lead to despotism, as it might encourage leaders to manipulate public opinion or suppress dissent for political gain. He emphasized the importance of national unity. He urged citizens to prioritize their shared identity as Americans over regional allegiances or party interests. And specifically for a state like Kentucky, which, by the way, when Washington gave his farewell address in 1796, we had only been a state for 4 years. 1792, we became a state, so we were a new state, and I think his warnings would have particularly underscored the need to avoid division here caused by party and to work for the prosperity and the stability of our state. So I want to ask you today, how important are political parties to you? See, a lot of us will claim, and I have a lot of people, especially Republicans, they'll claim, oh, party's not important to me. That's not that important. And it's not the most important aspect. But then when it comes to having a conversation with someone of the other party or someone who's an independent or someone of a different political persuasion, they won't really listen to them. They might act like they're hearing them, but they won't really give them a hearing because they're not of their tribe. They're not of their party. And they'll dismiss those views without even hearing the views of someone who's in a different party than he or she happens to be a member of. So we got to get past that. We've got to be able to hear and listen. Donald Trump was able to listen to Elon Musk, and I think a lot of Americans want the size and scope and cost of government to be reduced, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. How we do that, we need to have the discussion and the debate over that. But here's the point is, just because I disagree with a particular policy doesn't mean it's personal, doesn't mean I'm not for generally what this president wants to do, certainly much more than what his opposition wanted to do in this past election. I mean, there was a clear choice here in my view. Now, some of my friends don't agree with me, but I think there was. But it wasn't about party, it was about ideas.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And thanks for staying with us here on this Hump Day version of Kentucky's Voice. Glad to have you with us. Our Kentucky's Voice text line is 502-571-0970. Love to hear your thoughts about partisanship. Good, bad, otherwise. How partisan are you? How much do you care about the party versus the policy versus the legislation versus the outcomes and results? Are those more important? What's more important, party or product? Party or outcomes? And by the way, another development regarding a Kentucky state senator, Kentucky Senator David Yates, who currently represents part of Louisville in the state Senate, is looking to unseat longtime Jefferson County Clerk Bobby Holtzclaw, who's a Republican. Yates joined the Senate in 2021 after serving as a Metro Council member, and as president of the council, the senator will campaign against fellow Democrat Rosalind Welsh for the clerk's position. Holtzclaw, who's a Republican, has held the job for 27 years. If elected, Yates would vacate his Senate seat for the remainder of his term. That primary election, of course, will be next May. So, again, more developments along with Senator Robin Webb that we heard from earlier on Fox News. And congratulations to her, by the way. Great job on there, and talked about many important issues. She represented Kentucky very well in that interview, talking about the importance of representing her workers and her constituents, her rural constituents, I should say. And by the way, Senator Yates is the minority whip in the Kentucky State Senate. This off of our Kentucky text line at 502-571-0970, our Kentucky's Voice text line. David Yates is also leaving, says the texter, his position, but not his party, to run against Bobby Holtzclaw as Jefferson County Clerk. Who is replacing Yates? Well, that will be decided in a special election that will be called by the governor. That's his job, to call for an election, and the candidates will be put forth, I believe, by the Democratic Party in Kentucky. This also off of our Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. When dangerous policies such as open borders, transgender surgery are supported as priorities, it definitely is about party. Okay, good point there, too, that's obviously not listening to what the people want. It's about it's about the party platform, which has been hijacked on the Democratic side by the left-wingers. So politics or policy? What do you say? 502-571-0970. You can text us on that line, and I'll get your comments on the air. And what do you think about this? Is this needed? I think it's a needed discussion. I think we need to talk more about it. But, I'm committed to looking at the policies. And, Senator Webb, Robin Webb, who, as we said, recently switched her party affiliation this week, as a matter of fact, from Democrat to Republican in the state Senate. She's a rural Republican, represents a rural district now. But she's always been a big proponent of the Second Amendment. And in some cases, a stronger proponent of that than some Republicans have been in the state Senate and the state legislature. So if the Second Amendment is important to you, then why would you not support a Democrat if they took a strong stand? At least you can support them on that policy. Maybe you don't maybe you don't endorse them as a candidate, but it helps us when we can say, look at this individual policymaker, this legislator who's standing up for the right policy. Yes, she happens to be a Democrat. Yes, he happens to be a Democrat. Or yes, he happens to be a Republican on the flip side. But for me, it's more important about our freedom and our liberty to enjoy the benefits and the rights afforded us by the Second Amendment to the Constitution. That's more important. If somebody stands up for religious liberty, if somebody stands up for the right to assemble, the freedom of press, the freedom of association, whatever it may be, who cares what party it is? If they're right, they're right. Who cares? And you say, well, they're national party. Yeah, well, that's true. But again, we should judge, I think, each policymaker based on their own policy, their own principles, their own decisions. And it's become increasingly more difficult to do that. And Senator Webb talked about how it's become increasingly difficult to separate party from the individual, from the policy. So I think we need to, conservatives as well can be guilty of this. Well, he's a Democrat. I'm not going to listen to him. He's a liberal. He doesn't have any ideas. Listen, that's nonsense. What we need to be about is the ideas, and are they the right ideas? Are they the right policies? Are they constitutionally sound? Are they conservative? Are they common sense? Are they based on do they violate anything in our moral code or in our code of faith and value and ethics? Those are the more important questions. Who cares what party it is? Who really cares? And Washington was right. This will divide us if we don't grab a hold of it. 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line. And as I want to say this, I think there are a lot of people in the party, in the parties locally, I don't have a problem with. Now, if you start trying to push your social views on me, we're going to have a problem because I'm going to push back. But that's okay. You don't have to change your mind. You just have to tolerate allowing me to express my views. And this is what I find really problematic about this whole discussion about tolerance. When the left talks about tolerance, too often it has come to mean acceptance of their views or acceptance of special conditions and special laws and special privileges based on their beliefs, based on their sexual orientation, or based on the color of their skin, or 100 other things. But yet, when I speak up as a Christian, as a conservative, as a common sense Kentuckian, then all of a sudden we're canceled, or we're shunned, or we're marginalized. That's not a tolerant person. Doesn't do that. And so it's become much more about do as I say, not as I do. And it becomes about talking the talk rather than walking the walk. If you agree with me, I'll tolerate you. No, that's not tolerance. Tolerance is being able to accept someone who has a different view and them being able to hear what you have to say about it, whether they agree or not. This is a free country. And I think Christians need to understand that we need to speak up and speak out. And not under any illusion at all that everyone's going to agree with us, because they're not. And there's going to be people who disagree. We're going to have disagreements among ourselves, and no two people are going to agree on everything, probably. But that's not the issue. That's not the point. Our country was created with individual freedom, individual liberty, the right to express our views, the right to express our opinions without the government taking revenge upon us or oppressing us, and not allowing that to happen either. On the other hand, I don't think that I should expect special privileges because my views are different than yours. No, we have a fair level playing field. Let's have a debate. Let's have disagreement. We may never agree, but I think that if we can have that freedom of expression to continue to express ourselves, that benefits Christians. That benefits conservatives. And if you're going to talk tolerance to me, I'm going to have to know that you're going to tolerate my views and what I have to say without dismissing it. If I don't dismiss your views, if I listen to you, man, that's so basic, but it's so important. You know, it really is. It's important. 502-571-0970. This off our text line, and I appreciate the comments today from this texter who's come back with us here with this text. People should take the time to watch and listen to the House and Senate when they're in session. It really helps to understand bills and policies and who represents your values. Excellent point as well. And I would encourage you, the Kentucky legislature. Now listen, they're beginning to do their interim committee meetings. And this is where they do a lot of discussion and debate about what the policies are going to be. That once the session begins in January, these are the policies that are going to be debated. And even now, you can tune in on KET.org. Just go to KET.org, click on legislative coverage. You can hear the committee meetings. There was a committee hearing on education yesterday. There'll be committee hearings on transportation, on the budget, this will be a budget year coming up. There will be committee hearings on other issues, on workforce issues, on housing. There's been a task force established on what can we do about the housing issue? What can we do about implementing policies that will bring affordable housing to our state? These are all important issues to our state. And you need to know who's who. You need to know who's advocating for spending your spending your tax dollars in an inefficient way, in a wasteful manner, and those who are proposing the right policies based on conservative principles, based on individual liberty, based on smaller government, based on free market capitalism and not cronyism. Who wants to give away incentives? Who wants to let everybody play in a fair level playing field rather than giving handouts? This off our text line. They say in the medical field that a doctor prescribes a medicine for you because the benefits outweigh the side effects. I would like to feel that Rand Paul, as a doctor, doesn't talk about the good in this bill outweighing the bad. It's progress, not perfection. Okay, fair point. He wouldn't agree with you. He would say consistently, I've stood against more debt, more deficit spending. And so let's have it out. And, I believe this bill's probably going to win the day. But the debate's important. It's important that we allow the differing points of view to be expressed. And what happens is, out of that, we get better policy because they all have to be heard. Everybody's view has to be heard in the debate. And it is about progress here, and I think we're going to make some, okay? It may not be perfect, folks. It never is. It's never everything you want, okay? But we should always be pushing for the right ideas for what we believe in. I encourage you, stand up for what you believe in, be respectful, be based on the data, not just emotion, not just an emotional argument. Give the facts, give your reasons, stand up, give a reason for why you believe the way you do. We're going to do that here on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Wednesday, everyone. God